Standing by with Tom Pelissero of NFL Network, and you are the perfect person to ask this question about contracts. Tee Higgins, what do you think? I believe you said $30 million, but do you think the Bengals would be willing to pay that for him, knowing that they have Chase and Trey Hendrickson lingering, I guess?
All these things fit together. I think just speaking from a macro perspective across the league, there is a salary cap. I know there's this thing like, the salary cap's myth. It's like, no, every dollar you spend hits the cap eventually. It's about how you want to structure it. The Bengals have had a pretty straightforward contract structure for a lot of years in terms of big signing bonus, low year two number, and no guarantees beyond year one. That's just how they've done deals. They bent that with Joe Burrow. At times, that can complicate negotiations with other players, including Jamar Chase last year. So, the issue is going to be if you're paying a bunch of free agents at once. If you're paying Chase, who's not a free agent yet, but you're also paying Trey Hendrickson and you're paying Tee Higgins, if they keep their structure, that's a ton of bonus money that you're paying out in 1 year. So are they willing and able to do that? Do they bend some things in terms of structure? Those are all the complicating factors. I mean, listen, Tee Higgins, the only thing that stopped him so far in his career is his body. It's been the injuries that have popped up at various points, but we've seen guys with much more complicated injury histories get paid in free agency, particularly at the wide receiver position. I don't know if 30 is the number. Yeah, I could see a world where it's higher than that because there just aren't that many guys out there. He's going to do very well. I can tell you that much.
I think that's the argument in Cincinnati at least within the media is, yes, he has a lot of injuries. Tee Higgins specifically has a lot of injuries, soft tissue injuries, and there's games where he won't play. But at the same time, you know what he is and you know what he brings. How valuable do you think that is? Because I guess you could draft a wide receiver, but you don't know what he's going to bring, really, until he's actually out on the field in live football action.
Tee Higgins is a star player. He's a legit star player. And there's some guys who go through the soft tissue phase in their career, and they kind of outgrow it, or they at least have, a healthy phase after that. I mean, a lot of it's the way you train, and it's the way you eat and rest and everything else. And there's all kinds of people you can talk to who have more information from a medical perspective than I do, but it's not as if because you've had some of these things pop up, it means that you're always going to be that guy. Last year, I know there was a lot of stuff going around of is he shutting himself down because he's got because he wants money or whatever. Like the second one, I think it was a quad or whatever it was.
Yes.
Like that was a legit injury. It was killing him to not be out there. It's part because he knows these are the conversations people have about him. He doesn't want to be the injury guy. Right. And so, he's had to deal with some things. He got hurt twice during the practice week last year, which is really rough on the coaches and put them in a bind. But in terms of the value that he brings to the team, it's extremely high. I mean, he's the guy in this class. If you were going to pay a free agent wide receiver anywhere, Tee Higgins is the dude. There's a case to be made. Can you do a second franchise tag on him too? That's harder. It is less flexibility in that than simply signing him to a long-term deal. But if the rubber meets the road and Joe Burrow doesn't want to lose one of his favorite targets, could you do that? Hypothetically, yes.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm wondering from you, because I know Duke Tobin said earlier this week at the Senior Bowl that he had spoken with Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's really kind of been putting the heat on the front office publicly. Do you think that holds any weight with the front office, whether or not they would go a different route in the way that they've been structuring contracts their entire history?
Well, again, they broke their structure for Joe Burrow, which is not uncommon for teams. If you're going to do it, you do it with the quarterback position. That's kind of the push that Jamar Chase and his agent have been making, which is why should we be subject to the same contract structure? Mike Brown is I don't want to say he's set in his ways because there's been a lot of evolution for the Bengals in recent years here. But he's not going to capitulate to anything somebody says publicly, privately, whatever. I mean, he knows how he wants to run his organization here. I do think that what Joe Burrow is saying is an accurate reflection of how he feels, which is, but for some of the issues they had last year and certain games that played out the way they did and where they were at from a defensive perspective, like they had the tools. Nobody wanted to see that offense in the playoffs. Their defensive personnel was not nearly good enough, and then you had a couple injuries on top of it. They didn't make additions during the season. It was just a rough deal. But I don't blame Joe at all for being like, let's not blow this now. Let's not take a chance, let Tee Higgins go, and then just draft a couple of guys. Maybe Jermaine Burton becomes a pro and becomes a player. But like the odds that you're going to strike lightning on that with Tee Higgins, it's slim. But every team, again, the cap is real. Every team, every dollar you spend hits the cap eventually here. Can you afford to pay let's just call it, what's Joe, $50-something million quarterback and a $35 to $40 million receiver and a $30 to $35 million receiver, and a $30 million, $35, whatever Trey Hendrickson might be wanting, edge rusher. I mean, that's most of your cap right there. And so these are the things that they're going to have to work through.
And knowing that the Bengals, this is my last question for you, by the way, knowing that the Bengals have such a small scouting department, and if they do happen to hypothetically commit this much money to the offensive side of the ball, how important is the draft going forward, and how do you think they'll be able to hit on the draft moving forward with such a small scouting department?
Well, I don't know if it's so much the scouting department, because they deploy their assistant coaches like scouts in the spring. So they have people out a lot. They function, the Bengals function a little bit differently. And I give them credit for investing in, the new cafeteria and the locker room and the weight area. I was there when it was under construction last year. Like there's been a lot of progress on that front. I think it's more so there's always pressure. When you have an extremely top-heavy roster, it creates a lot of pressure on other spots. I mean, take the Dallas Cowboys last year as an example. The Cowboys paid Dak Prescott $60 million a year. They paid CeeDee Lamb like $34.5 million per year. They're now going to have to pay Micah Parsons, who's going to wait for these other deals to get done, $40-ish million per year. And so what happened last year? Well, because they had those looming big contracts, because they were still paying guys like DeMarcus Lawrence a lot of money, they did next to nothing in free agency, and they were starting 5 or 6 rookies almost the whole season. You don't want to be in that spot, but that's what when I talk about, like, again, you can never underestimate. Like, at some point, you're stressing your resources. You can be a draft and develop team, but if you draft well enough, those are the guys you're paying. The Bengals have a good problem. Trey Hendrickson was a free agent addition, but Tee Higgins, Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow, those are homegrown guys. That's who you want to build around. You want to have superstars on your team. But if you pay all of them, that is going to impact how many other veterans you can bring in, or you're going to be with a new defensive coordinator, now Golden this year, rolling out a bunch of really young, cheap talent and just hoping you can patch it together or do what they did this year and score 50 a game.
And quick answer, I'm sorry. What do you think, yes or no, is this the most important offseason in the Joe Burrow era, this offseason right now?
Well, I think it's the most important because it just the butterfly effect of these decisions that you're going to make here. Again, you have a franchise tag. You only can use one tag. Right. So are you going to deploy that? You don't have to worry about Chase because he is under contract for another year. If you want to string this out and have another offseason like that, you can, or you can just do whatever it's going to take to get the deal done early on. But you don't have to worry about the tag there. Tee Higgins, who would be on a second tag, so it would be 120%, which puts it in a range of $24 million, I think, next year. And then with Trey Hendrickson, I can't remember the exact numbers on his contract, but he'd be subject to the positional number, which is going to be substantial. So you can use one of those to potentially keep one of those guys, and the Bengals have never been shy about tagging people. No. Jesse Bates obviously learned that too, and then you draft his successor 1 year early, you let him go. That's kind of how the Bengals have backfilled for a number of years. But they could use the tag on one of those guys, and then can you get a deal done with the other one here? And then on top of that, also have Jamar Chase, who if you don't get a deal done with him, now you're talking about tagging him in 2026 and all the financial stress that would potentially create as well. Right. Not to mention, does he even show up? Does he show up without a deal, or does he just simply say, I'm not making that much anyway, I'm gonna sit out? And then how does that go? The last player who really sat out for a long time, I want to say with Mike Brown, was Carson Palmer, who eventually got traded away. There's so many different, we can talk all the hypotheticals here. What I would say is it's a good problem. You got talented players. But just remember, as much as you can say, hey, we got to get T back and get Chase done and get Trey done, if you do all those things for really good players, that is going to cause a trickle-down effect that's going to impact the flexibility you have to spend money in other places or be overly reliant on all these rookies got to hit and they got to play right now.
Tom, you're amazing. Thank you so much.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Deep in the Stripes with Elise Jesse on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.